proposed changes to our lay leadership structure. I'm going to provide some context for that here in just a second, but I want to be clear first about what it is we're doing right now in this space and what we'll do with these documents moving forward. If you need a copy of the proposed bylaws, I see Gladys, our servant leader, is here in the middle aisle and can hand those over to you. So if you just want to raise your hand, she can get those to you. Today's meeting is an opportunity for us to review two documents that are important in the life of our church. The first are proposed bylaws that will help define how we make decisions related to the administration and strategic vision of our congregation. The second is a glossary of words that help us think about what it is that various groups do. Both of these documents are proposed documents. Today is not a vote. We will not be voting on the documents. It's rather an opportunity for myself and Ryan Lincoln, the chair of our administrative board, to explain to you the broad strokes and for you to have a copy that you can take home for your own review and so that you can address any other questions you may have about the documents to myself or to Ryan. Any changes to our lay leadership structure in the United Methodist Church can only be made by a vote of the church or charge conference. That is, the group of members, professing members, duly gathered by the district superintendent at a particular time in the year to make decisions of this nature. So the reason I say that is just to be clear that no one other than the entire congregation has the authority to vote on these changes. Are we clear on that? Awesome. The second thing I want to do is just to begin to provide some context for us about what these documents are and why now. I see a hand there in the back. Shannon, it looks like somebody's on the way to you. Good. When I first began to meet with congregational leaders in May of 2022, there were a couple of things that were named as significant and important that were serving as boundaries to participation and engagement in the life of our church. The first was leader burnout. People felt like it was really hard once you got on a committee to get off of a committee. There were no off-ramps. The on-ramps, meaning how do you actually get involved in lay leadership in the life of the church, weren't always very clear. And we weren't really necessarily clear about what various groups were doing. So that was issue number one. There was lay leader burnout because there was just a general sense of confusion. If you hadn't already been a part of the leadership, it wasn't clear how you got into leadership. The second thing that got named that was important is the fact that there was a sense that there were silos. So there was a concern that decisions were being made in various spaces where there weren't clear patterns or methods of communication to allow people to understand why decisions were being made when they were, how they were being made, or how they were related back to the strategic vision of our congregation, right? So when we talk about how we make decisions in the life of the church, we're clear, both the discipline and Scripture make it clear, that everything that we do should be a reflection of our values, right? The way we spend our money, the way we spend our time, the way we invest in ministry. And when you don't know how those decisions are made in the first place, it's really hard to make values-based decisions. So silos were an issue. And the third concern was that our structures weren't necessarily in alignment with what the discipline requires for local congregations. Now, what do I mean when I say that? The Book of Discipline is the organized. Do we all know what the Book of Discipline is? I don't want to over-explain. Basically, the Book of Discipline helps organize the life of our congregations and our denomination. One of the things that it does is it outlines what lay leadership structures are approved by the General Conference for use in the life of a church. There are multiple models that can be used. We were operating under a model that was approved in the 1996 Book of Discipline that was subsequently changed in the 2000 Book of Discipline, where we had an administrative board that made decisions related to administration and a church council that made decisions related to ministry. That model was changed in part because of some of the issues that we've already named, siloing, lack of confusion about on and off ramps, etc. The second thing that was true is that the Book of Discipline sets limits and minimums for the number of persons that can serve on a particular committee. So, for instance, the Book of Discipline requires that a staff parish relations committee, that is the committee that helps serve as the personnel committee in the life of a church, have not less than 5 and not more than 9 members. No, not less than 5. but the range is 5 to 9. There is, I got clear about this because it wasn't clear. Ryan helped me get clear with the district superintendent. We had 3 people on our staff parish, right? Which is the model that the congregation had adopted when we merged. And what became clear in conversations with Ryan Lincoln, our administrative board chair, with Michelle Riley, the chair of our council on ministries, and other leaders in the congregational gatherings that I had, is that when the church merged, when we became Silver Spring United Methodist Church, we had begun to move towards what's called a one board model. It's a disciplinarily approved structure that has a single board that holds the function of the primary administrative committees in the life of a church. And that somehow, in that period of transition post-merger, we kind of stopped halfway through, right? So really what this document is an attempt to do is fourfold: to address the issue of silos, to help reduce leader burnout and clarify processes for decision-making, to help make sure that we are in alignment with the discipline, and most of all, to help us continue fulfilling the vision that was cast when we began the merger in 2014. So that's the context for the conversation. I want to invite Ryan up to explain the broad strokes of the bylaws, and then we'll have some time for questions.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Lincoln. I'm the chair of the admin board. I think what Pastor Will just said was spot on. I remember I joined the admin board in the current role in 2019, and I talked to then Reverend Angela about like, oh wow, it seems like we haven't fully adopted this one board thing. We're transitioning, and at the time, we were selling a building and doing other things, and she goes, well, we'll sort that out soon. I was like, that sounds a great idea. 2020. That'll be a great year to sort out these problems. And then, well, it's 2022. So this is been a work in progress for a while. I appreciate everyone who came out to talk about this. Really, so the 2 documents you have, the first is the bylaws, and the other one kind of says about the sort of a language glossary. So I want to talk a little bit about the structure that the bylaws is getting to, really getting back to the idea of one body, right? So as Pastor Will just mentioned, in the Book of Discipline, we're required to perform functions that are related to SPRC, which is the staff parish relations, finance, and trustees. And the intent of this is that it'll be one leadership council that will perform all of those functions as a unified body. So there will not be one group that's the trustees, and one group that are the staff parish relations, and one group that are finance. Instead, it'll be one group of people, that'll be 9 to 13, depending on the needs of the congregation, and in collaboration with the nominations committee, that'll define that group, and they were together make those decisions about the values, the vision, the strategy of the church, and fulfill the Book of Discipline. And the intent there is really just collaboration, right? Right now, you have a small group of people trying to do the SPRC stuff, then they have to coordinate with finance because there's probably budgetary impacts, and then they need to get it approved by the board. It's a bunch of little pockets of people doing a ton of work and trying to cross-collaborate. It slows things down. It leads to miscommunication. The intent here is to have one conversation where all members are fulfilling all 3 of those functions. And really to both increase that collaboration and the efficiency around that, right? So when we come to a board, when there's a leadership council meeting, which would be every month, just like the board meetings meet now, they are open to the public, encourage the congregation to attend and participate in those meetings, hear the business of the church is going on. They will be there to approve and make decisions based on various inputs about the strategy of the church. And then sort of the bylaws sort of articulate what that committee is supposed to be doing, right? And this is something that we have not had in a while, right? So reading through these as we were drafting these bylaws, it was exciting to say, oh, this is all the things that we're supposed to be doing and when we're supposed to be doing them and who's supposed to be doing them. And it's exceptionally helpful. So I would take some time, I would encourage you, if you haven't already, take a time to read through these bylaws. I think all this was sent in the email in the e-news in the middle of the week. So if you have a hard copy here, I would read through it. The intent here is that the leadership council is the decision-making body of the church. However, the leadership council will rely on various, what we're calling standing committees, to support the council's work. So there would be a standing committee on governance, right? That is the committee that's going to write documentation on policies of the church. Or there's a standing committee on personnel. They're going to work on revising the handbook as needed, or updating policies around work from home, et cetera, relating, right? They can draft those policies and those changes and then provide it up to the council for a decision. The intent there is, Pastor Will alluded to, many people, it's hard to make a 3-year commitment to the leadership council, and then sometimes those 3 years turn into 4 years, and then 5, and then 6, right? And it puts people in difficult positions. The intent here is to have a leadership council that is committed to 3 years, but the membership of the standing committee can be much more flexible. So for example, if we were to, or we have just sold a building recently. During that time, we would have expanded the participation in that facilities subcommittee, a standing committee, in order to support all of the work that goes around with managing a building. But those people maybe only need to commit for 6 months or a year, depending on where we were in that phase, and then they could phase off and doing other things, right? There's a lot more flexibility in those standing committees that are enabling the work of the council. And then specifically around the bylaws is articulating out all with clarity about the roles and responsibilities of the various people on the committee, or on the standing committees, or on the leadership council, and how we're working together to set the strategy and the vision for the church, and ensure that we are following the values of our congregation. I think that's all I have to say. I hope that was useful. And then I think we're going to hand over questions or next. I'll stick around.
Thank you, Ryan. I also want to acknowledge that Reverend Catherine Brown was a part of some of the conversations related to this change. Michelle Riley has been part of the conversation, and Daniel Colbert has also, as our lay leader, Colbert, not Colbert, not the TV show host. Daniel Colbert has also been a part of the conversation too. A couple of other just quick clarifications for us. The goal here really is ease of decision-making and ministry doing, right? So that when we want to start a new ministry team or a new ministry effort or outreach, we don't have to go to a council who has to go to another council to approve funding to find the place to do the thing. You see what I'm saying? The goal is to help make sure that our staff team has what they need in oversight from myself and from the leadership council, so that they can equip new ministry to happen organically and can respond adaptively to the needs of our congregation. What we believe this will do is make starting new ministry and supporting existing ministry easier, not harder. It's not that we're getting rid of support for existing ministries, but we're reducing the number of layers that you've got to work through to make a decision before you want to do a thing. So if LGBTQIA Justice wants to help plan a new pride parade in Silver Spring, which I know is a conversation that's happening at the council level right now, they wouldn't need to go to Council on Ministries, who would then need to go to the administrative board to find out whether or not there's financing available to do it. They could work directly with their equipping staff person, that is Reverend Michelle, who would, with me and the board, work to find the resources and make the thing happen. So that's the goal. And to allow better use of our people resources. You've heard me say it from the pulpit all the time. All of us have a role to play in this thing that we're doing in ministry here together. We want to make sure that when you're plugging in ways that are sustainable, that aren't going to inadvertently steal your soul. We're not looking to make any kind of, any Christian dementors around here at Silver Spring United Methodist Church. And in ways that allow you to move flexibly from one thing to the next, because we also know that there are moments when, because of our own personal lives, we need to make changes to the commitments that we have in the life of the church. And as we grow, we know that our spiritual gifts change too. And so what might work in one season of ministry for you might not be the place you want to plug in 4 years, or it might be, right? So that's kind of the idea. The image that I've been using for folks, I'm going to set these down, is that of a wellspring. So if you think about an artesian well, our aquifer is the Holy Spirit, right? Our source, what we do, everything about who we are is given to us by God. The springhead, the place where the water actually emerges, is the congregation, it's the community, right? And as the water flows upward, it flows through ministry teams, through groups like our mobile food pantry, out into the world, right? Think about the end of that spring. At the very top then sits the Leadership Council, who helps make sure the water gets to where it needs to go, that it's doing that in a way that helps us fulfill our mission, vision, and values, and then is pouring the resources back into the aquifer, right, into that source of our strength so that we can continue doing ministry in the world. So in that way, we're creating something that's constantly repeating itself, right? A closed cycle of ministry that's closed, not closed. A closed cycle that's not closed. Do with that what you will. I went to seminary. I do not have a degree in physics. On that note, what questions do you have for either me or for Ryan? Or are there questions? Let me encourage you to take a look at a couple of things really quickly in the bylaws. Does everybody have a copy of the bylaws document? So flipping with me through this, the first couple of pages explain how the council will conduct its business. That's a pretty basic outline of meetings and the structure that it will use. I want to note, because this is important, that in moments where there are emergency decisions that need to be made in between regularly scheduled council meetings, the executive committee of the council can convene, as long as they notify the full council, to make those decisions. So if there's a major issue in the life of the church that needs to immediately be addressed, that group is empowered to act on the council's behalf as long as the council is notified. That feels important for us to know. And then if you'll turn with me to page 5, you'll see some explanation of the various standing committees that Ryan referenced. The executive committee, I just explained. The nominations and lay leadership, or leadership development standing committee, has a twofold function. Part of its function is to help make sure that we have slates of nominees to serve on the leadership council that can be voted on every charge conference or church conference, typically in November. But their second task is to help make sure that we are investing back in ministry and in processes that empower our entire congregation to serve and lead with one another. Because all of us are servant leaders. All of us are in leadership in various ways in the life of our church. If you'll turn the page over, you'll see that the next committee is the Budget and Operations Standing Committee. That's a mouthful, in part because we wanted to make a difference we wanted to draw a little bit of a difference between Finance Committee, which is a role that the Leadership Council plays in this committee. But this committee really is there to help Andrew and our operations team do the work that they need to do, especially paying attention to monthly and quarterly financial statements, making sure that we're following all issues in relationship to compliance, those kinds of things. I know. Personnel Standing Committee. So this committee is there to help make sure that the normal rhythms of personnel care and support and supervision are attended to. One of the things that's important to note about our leadership structure is that the way that this works is the council is my supervisor as lead pastor, and then I serve as primary supervisor for almost all the rest of the staff, except for Kiana, who is supervised by Andrew. What that means is that annual supervisory conversations happen with me for the rest of the staff. They happen with the council for me, and I report back both to the personnel committee and to the council all of my supervisory conversations with staff. So I name that so that we're clear that there's constant communication between the three parts, but that the council itself is not supervising our entire staff team. And the last two pieces, Facilities Standing Committee. That's self-explanatory. We have a large piece of property that we occupy. They help make sure that that's cared for. And the Governance Standing Committee. This is the most important of these standing committees. So I just want to have a moment for us to pay attention to this. This is the committee that helps us make sure that we have the policies and practices in place that keep our community safe, that help us make sure that we're doing ministry together well, and that we're responding as we need to various needs that emerge in the life of our congregation. One of the very first things that Marie and I have already been in conversation about is a food allergen policy, right? Because we know that as food allergies increase among all populations, but especially among our children's population, we want to be a welcoming space for people regardless of what their allergy might be. This committee would take that draft policy that we've already been given, review it, make sure that it's where it needs to be, pass it on to the council, and the council would approve it. So that committee is going to be doing important work, especially in this next season. I think that's it. What questions do you have? Any other questions for us?
Okay. I guess my question offhand is this in lieu of like the council ministries? Is everything being rolled into one, so it's no longer council ministries anymore? Okay. Want a clarification?
Well, friends, as I've already said, there isn't a vote that's happening today. So here's what I want to invite you to do. Take these documents home and read them carefully. As people who took the time to show up at this meeting, you're obviously folks who are invested in the life and ministry of our congregation, and this is no insignificant change. Pray about them. Help pray for the emerging ways that we can support leaders, cultivate new leaders, and move forward as a community together. And then make sure that you make the time to show up either in person or online to our upcoming church conference on November 3rd at 7 p.m. Didn't see anybody pull out their calendars, so I'm assuming it's already there. No. But if you can, that's an important time not only for us to receive reports from our pastors and our pastors in extension ministry like Reverend Kirkland and Reverend Jenny. It is also an opportunity for us to make decisions about things like this. And that's where the vote on this new structure will take place. Mary?
So if we have questions in the interim, then we won't be able to ask them at that time, at that meeting, right? You want them answered before then? If there are questions for this.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you, over the next week or so, if you read these, obviously sooner the better, right? Reading over and asking questions, email Pastor Will or myself those questions, and we'll be happy to clarify that or make corrections, right? Maybe there's a typo in the bylaws that we haven't caught when we're reading through. Even little inputs like that, I think earlier in the admin board, we reviewed it, and Lee caught a typo that was an important fix, right? So even though several people have read it, extra eyes is always good. So yeah, please feel free to email me, Pastor Will as well.
And you can always ask questions at church conference. Church conference isn't just, it's a time for conversation as much as it is anything else. And what I hope that you all know and what I'll continue to reinforce is that I'm committed to any of these decisions that we're making about the life of our church being made in conversation with one another and in community. So no change is going to happen, nothing intentionally happen. No change is intentionally going to happen without folks having been brought into the conversation and given opportunity to discuss, to ask questions in advance, right? Because again, we can't become who God is calling us to be unless we're all involved together. Shannon, did you have a?
I may not fully understand, but has the SBRC always been the primary supervisor of all the staff? And is it a change where the senior pastor is now supervising more, or has it always been that the senior pastor has been the boss of all the staff?
So our employee handbook says that the lead pastor serves as primary supervisor for the staff team. But the SPRC is there to help assist in supervision and in issues where there is supervisory issues that come up that can't be resolved between the supervisor, whoever that assigned supervisor is, and their supervisee as the intermediary. So the staff parish serves as a personnel committee in that way. In smaller churches and in parishes where there's a single pastor or maybe only 2 or 3 staff, there are instances where staff parishes will serve as the supervising body. So it just kind of depends upon what congregation you're in. But here, the handbook says that the senior pastor is the primary supervisor for the rest of the staff. As long as I've been here, which isn't all that long. So that's not a...
Thank you, Shannon. That's a great question. So we're not proposing a change at all to how the supervisor of the staff works. It's just that SPRC, instead of it being just 3 people, James, Carl, and Grace right now, and then having to then work with the board to do things, that the council will be the SPRC, right, and be able to make those decisions jointly.
And if you've ever got questions about staff, how staff supervision happens or what that process looks like or what the paperwork looks like, you can talk to me. I'm happy to provide that. And the rest of the staff know too. I mean, we all meet regularly with one another to talk about these kinds of things. So you can always check in with any of the staff.
Yeah, just curious. One of the things that was the driving force behind this was the fact that we didn't have, 5 people on SPRC and stuff like that, and I'm grateful to see that being addressed. However, I noticed that is not really included in the document. It doesn't say that there will be 5 people on the SPRC or anything else. Right. So so there's 9 people on the council, and then all 9 minimum are going to be also on every standing committee, or at least on the personnel. Sorry, I'm just not putting it all together yet.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the intent is that the Leadership Council is 9 to 13 people, 9 because that's a requirement, and up to 13 to change based on the flexible needs that might face the congregation. So that in that situation, Leadership Council say, hey, we might want to expand up to 13 to address things, and then relay that to the nominations committee who would put forward the nominations at the next charge conference, right? To your question, James, so all those people on the Leadership Council would be on for a 3-year term, right? A third or so would roll over every year, right? So that there's continuity. All of them are performing the responsibilities of finance, trustees, and SPRC as defined by the Book of Discipline and operate as a single body, right? So you could think of them all as trustees and all as the finance committee and all as SPRC, right? Now, the standing committees are to support the work of the Leadership Council, and they are led by at least one member of the Leadership Council will sort of lead and chair those meetings and when the work they're working on. But those individual committee members, standing committee members, are not necessarily part of the Leadership Council. Anyone on the council, if they would like, maybe a couple people are really into governance and they are passionate about updating our safe sanctuary policy, they're welcome to participate in those standing committees. But also the nomination committee would work to find people who would want to support those. And that's where I said there's be flexibility in around the term, right? So I thank you. There's flexibility around the term, right? So maybe someone can only commit to a year and they have lots of background in facility concerns. They could participate on that standing committee for that year term and then have an off-ramp. Does that clarify? The people that are on the standing committee are not part of the Leadership Council necessarily.
Thank you. Yeah, for clarity for me, is it possible for you to do something like a chart so I can see the various structure? Because since I haven't read this and all this is new, I think I need something that I can visualize.
Ryan has been working on one for us, and there's been some debate about whether lines should be dashed or solid or what direction arrows. So we're trying to clarify some of that stuff, but we are working on a graphic. Ryan has been working on that for us.
This has been super helpful. Thank you. Just wondering, I guess I'm trying to understand then with I guess I misunderstood the standing committee then. Well, I see it though in your definitions. That's really good. The personnel, budget operators. But what about other committees? Or will there be other committees that are formed? I mean, like, so education or, well, LGBTQ. I mean, are we considered committees, or I guess how does that function or relay into this structure? I wasn't sure.
So I think, Mary, there's 2 parts to that question, right? One is standing committees. This is really just articulating the baseline. In the event that the council needs support on something and there's a new situation, right? There's nothing to prohibit them creating another standing committee to support in that. For maybe it's an ad hoc 6 months type of thing, or it could be longer depending on the life of the church, right? I think there is an important distinction. These standing committees are not ministry teams, right? Are not the ministries. Right? These standing committees are to help the council complete the work of the council, right? And the council is there to set the vision strategy for the church, but are not there to direct and run the ministry teams, right? I think that Pastor Will probably have more articulate ways of saying that, but that's really over to the clergy, the supporting staff, and then all the servant leaders to form that.
The hope here is that we don't have to have the leadership council making decisions about forming new teams for ministry. And so we have articulated some slightly different language to draw a line between what a committee is, so a committee serving a very particular administrative function, and what teams are that support ministry, and that really is just for clarity's sake. So if you look on the bottom of page 1, and then on page 2 of the leadership glossary, you'll see the first thing at the bottom there is a ministry team. So a ministry team is a body of people directly resourced and equipped by a clergy or lay staff person who works collaboratively to help accomplish and steward the vision of Silver Spring United Methodist Church. And that could be any group of people that are working together around LGBTQIA justice, around feeding ministries, around racial justice ministries, those kinds of things. So any group that's helping think about how we're doing these big questions, answering these big questions, would be a ministry team. Big ministry questions. The second definition you'll see there on page 2 is a servant leadership team. And the difference between a ministry team and a servant leadership team is that a servant leadership team exists to accomplish a very specific task. These are groups of people that are ushers on Sunday mornings, right? Scott may not want to form a committee to help think about the high-level strategic purpose of ushers and greeters, because we know what those are. It's hospitality. But Scott has to help coordinate a team of people to usher, right? So that's a servant leadership team. Or our communion stewards would be a servant leadership team, right? They're a group of people who have a particular role that they're filling that's time-bound and specific. Our prayer shawl team, right, is a servant leadership team. It's also and this is the fun thing about this, right? Because we've gotten it away from having to be administrative, the lines get blurry. So a team can be a servant leadership team and a ministry team and a small group or a class, right? Because that's what happens when you're in community with one another, right? A Sunday school class can become a small group. A small group can become a ministry team. A ministry team might have servant leaders that it's helping organize. So does that help clarify? The other two words here that are going to be new for us is ministry, maybe not new, but just articulate, this is part of how we're thinking. Ministry areas or ministry departments. So we have staff that have particular functions, right? Pastor Daniel is our pastor for youth and connecting ministries. And within that area falls all of our adult and youth discipleship, all of our hospitality ministries, and all of our ongoing small group work, right? So that's a ministry area. Marie serves as our director of children and family ministries and racial justice and feeding ministries and, right, Marie? All the things. So Marie has a very particular area that she's serving. Reverend Michelle has a very particular area that she's serving, congregational care and LGBTQIA justice. So ministry areas, just to kind of help us think about it, Mary Ann serves as our director of music ministries, right? That's a ministry area. Equipping staff person, this is just a way that we can change how we think about staff, right? So rather than being functionaries of the church, being resources that help us have the resources we need to do the work we're called to do, right? Our staff team, all of us, are here to equip our congregation for ministry, not just to do ministry, but to equip y'all to do ministry and help you have the access to the resources and support you need to do that. So when you think about the staff people that are supporting you, I want to encourage you to think about that word equipping as primary in our relationship, right? Our job is to help you have what you need to do the work that God is calling us to do, as set forth in our vision and strategy as a congregation. It's gone first. Shannon?
If this is passed, will the current members of the SPRC who have not served their full time, and the current members of the administrative board and the current members of the finance committee suddenly become the leadership council? Or will new people be chosen?
I'm taking names, but be careful. I'm asking people to sign in blood. No. That's a great question. It's a great process question. So, in short, no. The people who are currently in leadership may or may not be nominated to be on the new leadership council, but the nominees will be voted on by the entire congregation at church conference. So what will happen is our nominations committee is already in the process of kind of working with existing leaders and staff to understand the needs, right? And beginning to put together slates of people to be nominated for 1-year, 2-year, and 3-year terms. Because if this is approved, we'll need to have that in place to vote on at church conference. If it's not approved, we'll likely continue in the mode that we're in for the time being until we can nominate new leaders. Those nominees will come to the church conference, and everybody who is a professing member of the church that's present has the right to vote, right? And it's a simple majority vote. 50% plus one elects that new leadership council. If you were to combine all the people that you just named and all the other folks that are in leadership, we would have a council that was way too big, right? So we know that some folks are going to be stepping back. And I know personally that some folks are elated to be able to take a little bit of a break. So.
So my question has. Can you hear me? Okay. In this Article 3 of the draft bylaws about council members, certain things about council member traits, great language, by the way, but then skills of the council members. And if you could expand on that a little bit, because, I look at that and there's very clearly defined and narrowly defined. And I just wanted to get a little sense of how that's being sort of developed and thought about. For example, having expertise in, legal counsel if you're in the operations department, which the current trustees, none of us would necessarily fill that, just in a sense.
So I'll take a first pass. So the intent here is to kind of set some broad characteristics and traits that would be useful, right? To help really, the nominations committee bears the burden to sort of look at who's on the board or on the council right now or serving elsewhere, and finding gaps based on also input from the council to say, hey, we'd like some more people who know a lot about real estate, right? Because we have, things going on in our building, or tenant relations, right? The intent there is really to provide a framework for the nominations committee. This is not a comprehensive list at all, just some things that, in our discussions that have become important, and looking at other churches that have a similar model and what they have in their bylaws as well, right? I think this is a good opportunity if there's additions or things, we could add it in. It isn't necessarily a requirement, right? It's not like, we need 50% need to be attorneys, right? And, but the idea is, especially for the different types of standing committees, you would probably want someone who has certain background, right? For governance, people who have, writing policy for organizations, right, would be a useful skill, right? So, that's sufficient. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. If someone who is not on a council committee or anything right now would be interested in, say, serving with financial or any of the other new bodies, can they nominate themselves, or they should contact someone else to nominate them?
I think I would use a slightly different word than nominate themselves, but express interest, absolutely, right? So, reach out to anyone on the admin board, the leadership council, any of the pastoral staff. Also, the nominations committee is part of the charge conference, so their names are published, so you can reach out. Michelle Riley is kind of filling that role right now, is leading the so yes, absolutely. If you're interested in something, feel free to reach out. They're also relying a lot on the time and talent surveys that were completed, where people have expressed interest in doing things like staff parish relations or indicating their traits and skills, experiences they may have. So all that information, if I'm correct, has been passed over to the nominations committee, and they're kind of going through that and looking at makeups, and then start reaching out to people to say, hey, would you like to commit to, well, we always start with a 3-year term, and if not, then we back down to whatever to get that on that cycle. So absolutely. If you're raising your hand now, I'll write your name down and which committees you'd like to sign up.
So the other thing, yes, thank you so much for that, Ryan, that clarity. I think the only other thing I would say is that the gift in this new structure is that while the council is elected to, people are elected to 3-year terms, right? And to be nominated, the nominations committee would nominate a slate. Those people would be asked in advance if they wanted to stand, and we would vote at church conference. If at church conference somebody wanted to nominate themselves, in theory they could. Yeah, absolutely, for the leadership council. But for these other committees, the great news is that if you want to help out with personnel and when there's a need for personnel stuff, let the chair of the personnel committee, who will be a member of the council, know. It's an easy way to get plugged in, or let the nominations committee know. You don't have to be voted on, you don't have to be nominated, you can step into leadership that way.
And I think that's a great point for those, especially new to church, right, who may want to step into a leadership role. They can sort of get their feet wet while supporting a standing committee and making a shorter commitment. And if they like it, then they can, indicate that and potentially be considered by a nominations committee to move into leadership, if that makes sense, right?
In the interest of making sure that everybody's voice is heard at the congregational meeting, will you have an opportunity, since some people will be viewing it online, to set up so that the people viewing it online can vote online?
So I want to be clear, we don't set up those meetings, the district does, but the district does have a process, at least they did last year, I know, for voting on documents online. So yes, anybody joining via Zoom could vote. But it's not Ryan or myself that chairs that meeting, it's the district superintendent. So we'll just want to remind Reverend Green, if we need to, that it's important for us to have an opportunity for people to voice concerns. He's very good about opening up those spaces, though. And he'll be the one that's chairing our church conference this year. Okay, so friends, here's, I asked you earlier to pray over these documents. I'm going to ask you to continue doing that. The last thing I'll say is that I believe this is going to be an iterative process, right? Our goal is to get as close to perfect as we can get, but we know that there may need to be changes along the way as we live into this structure or any new structures. And the good news is that changes are as simple as reaching out to the district superintendent and saying, we'd like to amend our bylaws. Can you authorize a church conference? Oftentimes, the pastor of the parish can chair that church conference, and we can make that change. So even if we get into this and 6 months in, we find out, hey, this thing is a little wonky and we want to fix it, or we want to clarify this other thing over here, or we want to adopt this thing over here, we can do that with relative ease. So even as we're thinking about these things, I don't want you to think about them as they're being carved into stone and handed down from on high, because they're not. This is a living document, and it's meant to help. It's meant to be able to be changed as we grow into it in the future. Okay, well, thank you, friends, for all of your commitment and support. Can we pause for a moment of prayer before we head out? Gracious God, from generation to generation, you have been faithful to call forth leaders to serve your people. We give you thanks for the past generations of leaders who have brought us to this present moment, and for the way that your Spirit is stirring even among us now to call forth new leaders, new ways of thinking about how we operate, new opportunities to serve your people in Montgomery County. We simply ask now that you would send your Spirit upon us in a special way, that we might be clear and discerning about the decisions that we're making in these moments, setting the stage for what is to come. Help us to reach out to one another and to trust that we can, to know that we are in community in a way that helps us answer questions and have the space to ask them. Help us to rely upon one another as we seek to be faithful to serving you. Help us, God, to have what it is we need to make this next step together. Go with us as we leave this place. Keep us safe and hold us close and draw us back together again, we pray. In Jesus' name.